Good morning, James Thornton, Intrepid Travel CEO. How are you this morning, joining us from Melbourne, Australia?
I'm fantastic, although it's 6 p.m. here in Melbourne, so almost time for a drink, I think.
Well, 9 a.m. here in the UK. We're live on the TTG Facebook page, so it's great to have you at this time and to discuss some of the peculiarities and challenges that we're all facing at the moment. And it's great to get the perspective from an operator at the moment, and obviously one that provides quite a unique style of travel within the business. So look, first and foremost, James, I just wanted to ask you really simply, how are you? How are the teams out in Australia and in the UK and around the world? How is things with Intrepid Travel at the moment?
Yeah, thanks, James. We're as well as we could be. Like every travel company, it's been the most challenging of times, hasn't it? We've had to make countless impossible decisions on the fly, and the pace of change that's been going on has just been like nothing we've ever seen in our 31-year history. Fortunately, our teams are safe and well. As you know, we've got offices in over 30 countries around the world with people based globally, all having very different experiences. And but in general, the team is remaining pretty positive and doing our best to stay as connected and look after each other and look after our customers as best we can.
Brilliant. And I mean, we reflected it a moment ago, but this really has, we all can't stand that word unprecedented at the moment, but this crisis really is taking a lot of everyone's time at the moment, and really is kind of dominating what we're all doing. So can you give me a bit of an idea about when Intrepid first kind of started to look at this as a real serious issue that is going to be, like you say, I mean, with your tours, I think suspended up until the end of September at the moment. I mean, that shows at the moment the severity with which you're already taking this.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I recall the first time I really took it seriously. My global PR director gave me a call. I was at the Australian Open tennis in the middle of January, and she called me and said that the Australian Financial Review, so the equivalent of the Financial Times in the UK, wanted to interview me around our reaction to coronavirus. And I said, oh, it's a bit of an over-exaggeration. Our team in China are definitely reacting to it, and they're taking some steps from our Beijing office. But it seemed all a bit of an overreaction. And in fact, in my January board reports, we meet as a board every 2 months, and we were meeting at the end of January. I just put one line in about the notion of this new thing called coronavirus, and that we might have some impact to our trip operations in China, which starts around about February and March time. I think we have about 30 passengers traveling in China in February. And January was a record bookings month for us. We sold almost £30 million of travel in January. And yet within 6 weeks of that, we had moved to suspend all trips worldwide for the first time in our 31-year history. We were in the process of having to repatriate 3,000 people split across a wide range of different countries and continents. We had global borders shutting. We were staring down the barrel of having very limited revenue coming into our business, and as a result, we've had to reduce our workforce significantly. So it's huge decisions that that have had to end decade-long careers, decisions that have left family and staff around the world without incomes in local communities, and decisions that have created huge impact for all of our staff and our friends and our colleagues and partners around the world. So it's been quite phenomenal.
Certainly. And given the nature of the wide range of destinations that Intrepid Travel offers, I mean, like you say, just starting with China, for instance, but then moving on to some extremely kind of remote locations you offer. I mean, can you give us any kind of insight into some of the efforts that went into that repatriation operation and some of the instances that you had to deal with?
Yeah, totally. So it was the Friday the 13th, which I should have known was ominous. The afternoon of Friday the 13th of March, the Australian government actually recommended that all Australians reconsider the need to travel overseas at that time. And that was just, huge alarm bells when Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister, talked to that. And so we woke up in the morning of Saturday the 14th of March, and I actually ended up calling my global leadership team to my house in the afternoon. And having got reports from what was going on the ground, we then made the unprecedented decision at 5 p.m. to suspend all operations and announce that at 7 p.m. that evening. And at that
So we seem to be having some kind of technical issue here with James's video at the moment. Bear with us for a moment, and we'll see if we can get it back.
Hi, James. I think you
There we
lost me
go,
there.
James. No worries. One of those things that we're all dealing with these kind of things at the moment. So you're back with us now. We're still live on Facebook. So if you want to pick up where you were, that would be great.
Yeah, sure. I'm not sure where I left off, but we've just had groups all over the world and all dealing with different situations. Groups were, stuck at altitude in Nepal, or difficulty getting passengers back from remote destinations to major airports and getting them repatriated home. But that was a couple of weeks, 2 to 3 weeks of trying to get all those passengers repatriated, and unfortunately we're able to do that. Probably one of the bigger ones was having 140 passengers on a ship coming up from Antarctica, and Ushuaia no longer allowing that ship to dock, which required us to head up to Montevideo and then repatriate passengers back to Australia on a charter flight, which we had to charter ourselves. So, just as we keep saying, unprecedented stuff and incredibly challenging. But we were fortunate to receive some really fantastic feedback from passengers who were looked after very well by our different DMC officers around the world.
Yeah, and certainly, and just going back to the impact on the ground at the moment as well. I mean, you mentioned a moment ago that some of the effects you've had to make on staffing and things like that. What's been the situation for kind of your tour guides, your local staff, your contacts, and I think probably your DMC partners as well?
Yes, I mean, we're quite unique in the sense that we have our own DMCs. We have 25 of them across the world. Those DMCs all employ the vast majority of local people. We have over 500 employees in those teams, and those DMCs have been impacted in the same way as our sales and marketing offices that people would be more familiar with in London and in Toronto and in Melbourne and Auckland. And so sadly, we've had to take steps to reduce our cost base, like so many other businesses have had to do. And that has meant that we've had many long-standing staff have to leave us, because as a business we have very little revenue coming in at the moment, and as a result it's difficult to maintain the cost base that we have. So yeah, we've had to take difficult decisions all over the world, and it's been very, very difficult and very sad.
Yeah, and I guess in some of your places where you have a larger presence, so Australia, for instance, and the UK, and some other areas, that there is obviously government support available that can help you out in this situation, whether it's in terms of like we have in the UK with furlough, or there's government support or financial support. But I guess in some of the destinations you operate, there simply isn't that support available that you can necessarily take advantage of.
Yeah, there isn't the social support network in many of the countries in which we operate in, and indeed, actually, many of the countries that we have our DMC offices in, the countries are actually a lot slower to provide the government support that is now starting to come to the fore more. We're seeing a country like Morocco, the government stepping up with their kind of equivalent of a furlough, or as we call it down here in Australia, the job keeper scheme. So we are getting some benefits as a result of that, and we're really trying to tap into every possible government initiative that we can, either for the benefit of the business, or of course the benefit of the individual, to try and retain as many staff as we possibly can. In Australia, we had to stand down our staff for a period of time. They will now be back at work from the 1st of May, because the government is providing quite significant initiatives to get people back to work. But yeah, how long that will last for, we'll have to see. Travel is one of the first industries impacted by COVID, and it will almost certainly be one of the last industries to come back post-COVID, won't it? International travel is is going to be one of those things most difficultly impacted. And we will require ongoing government support, be it not just here in Australia, but in the UK and in Canada and in all of the places in which we operate, so that we can sustain a workforce while we have limited revenues coming in.
Yeah, and that brings me on really to kind of the issue of when we do get to the point. I mean, at the moment we referenced earlier that you have operations suspended until the 30th of September.
Yeah.
I mean, that presumably is open to review and really will just depend on the situation in destinations. But I mean, have you given much thought to how then you start flowing employees back into this, and then also actually then start bringing back destinations? I mean, will that be kind of on a piecemeal basis when you're able to sort of bring things back online, or will it kind of move by continent or anything like that?
Yeah, I think the way in which we're seeing travel coming back is we think it'll be kind of what we call hyper local to start with. We think there'll be people traveling, you know, just around from the hubs in which they live. You know, like me, I'm sure you're very keen, and everyone watching will be very keen just to be able to get out and, you know, do some walking, go to a restaurant, try some food, go for a cycle, and you know, even if that has to be within the location of, you know, 50 miles from where people live, that people will be keen to do that. And so you'll see that kind of hyper local travel start. Then I think you'll see some interstate or some domestic travel start. From there, I think we'll start to see countries opening borders to each other. I would imagine, you know, countries within Europe opening their borders relatively quickly to each other. Down here in Australia, we're the way in which we're reacting to the virus, I suppose, and treating the virus is a little bit differently to the approach of some of the other governments. So you'll see Australia and New Zealand will be almost certainly one of the first countries to open its borders. And I think you'll start to see that kind of sub-regional approach. Mm-hmm. And then eventually, I'm sure you'll see that sub-regional approach kind of grow. And so Australia will have comfort to, I don't know, send people to Japan, for example, or to send people into some Asian destinations, and perhaps the UK into the US, and vice versa. So I think it's going to be very progressive. You know, 30th of September, why have we gone to that extent? We've been very influenced by airlines and also by government down here in Australia. We know that when Scott Morrison, the Prime Minister of Australia, took the decision to shut the borders, it was ultimately one of the toughest decisions that his government would have had to make. In shutting the border. So for him to be in position to then reopen the border, he's got to have confidence that not only the travellers going out of the country will be safe, that the travellers coming into the country will be safe and protect the population, and the hard work that has gone on to kind of protect the Australian population here. You know, we still only have, I think just checked before I came online, 6,750 cases and 91 deaths down here. There was only one case by community transmission yesterday here. So we're fortunately quite ahead of the curve. And you know, for Australia to open its borders, I think they're going to have to see, you know, similar kind of confidence in other countries, unfortunately.
Yeah, I think that's going to be a really interesting point. Is that it's not necessarily your readiness to have your citizens to travel at the moment. It's the readiness of destinations to accept your citizens to travel as well. I think that's a point that hasn't really been touched upon too much so far, and I think it may well become more and more relevant as time goes on as well. That also brings me on to thinking about when it does come to the resumption of operations. Obviously, Intrepid has the benefit of its DMCs on the ground and the contacts it has in destination as well. Do you think that when you're given the green light to be able to return to a destination, you'll be able to move things on quite quickly to start taking people back there?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's the benefit of the global DMC network that we have, that we'll be able to, you know, really, we have a team of staff, you know, ready to go and keen to go, and, you know, our global pool of leaders, you know, very keen to welcome people back. And so, yeah, I think we're incredibly well positioned to be able to open operations as soon as we possibly can. And look, you know, it'd be great if we were being too conservative by saying suspending all trips until the end of September. I suppose we're just increasingly seeing customers wanting clarification from us, in the sense of, you know, I'm thinking I've got to travel in July, or thinking I've got to travel in August, and you know, some people were uncomfortable with that proposition, and you know, Intrepid does have a wide age group. It's really anyone from 18 to 80 does our kind of trips, and we wanted to make sure that that, you know, safety is the primary concern of any travel company and any tour operator, and you know, we wanted to make sure that we're not taking people to destinations until it was safe and secure to be able to do so.
Yeah. Do you think you're going to? Is it going to be a challenge at all? Do you think to convince people that it is going to be safe again to travel and to really kind of? I mean, your trips are all about kind of these very unique local in-destination experiences. I mean,
Yeah.
is it going to be hard to kind of people to convince people to have the same kind of level of kind of want to go and do those kind of things when you can?
Yeah, I think look possibly. I think the interesting thing is that every customer demographic is slightly different, aren't they? I think yeah, younger people are obviously going to be slightly more resilient. Our number one psychographic for Intrepid is the socially conscious traveller who's keen and usually in their late 30s, early 40s, wants to get out and see the world and wants to do that in the safety and security of a group. And I think if Intrepid's telling them it's secure and safe to go to a destination, they're typically going to back us and be prepared to go to those destinations. I think it's probably natural that we'll see older passengers possibly more reluctant to go far flung away from home. So I think it will depend a little bit by demographic in terms of how comfortable people will be to get out and travel and see the world again.
Excellent. Speaking of your travellers there as well, we have to move on to one of the kind of most difficult issues I think we've all faced here, and certainly I know it will have been an issue for Intrepid as well. But I mean, refunds, amendments, rebookings, the various different sort of legislative structures you have to work within around the world. I mean, it's been a huge topic, and I'm sure you've had to wrestle with some very difficult sort of situations with this. Can you give us a bit of an idea about what the process has been for Intrepid?
Yeah, absolutely. So I suppose we'd suspended trips in different order as well. So to start with, we just suspended for 6 weeks from 14 March through to 30 April. Pretty quickly after that initial first suspension, we extended through to the 31st of May. So that first kind of pull was clearly the majority of the passengers had booked. So we had 35,000 passengers booked to travel in that 14 March to 31 May window. So it's a huge number of people. And like every company, every travel company, we've been working incredibly hard to have those customers accept credit vouchers, and we incentivize those customers to take the credit vouchers by offering 110% of the original trip value to encourage them to use these credit vouchers for future travel up to, I think it's about 2.5 years from now to take it. And that was the hope and the desire. And of the 35,000 passengers who were asked to take credit vouchers, to this point, we've only had 1,400 reject that offer and request refunds. So, over 95% of our customers at this point have accepted those credit vouchers, and that's fantastic. Of course, we realise that ultimately not everyone can accept the credit vouchers. People have lost income, people have lost jobs. And so in these cases, we honour our original booking conditions, and reluctantly we will refund. It's not our preference. The less refunds we have to make, the better and stronger position Intrepid will be in. Fortunately, we've had 4 very good financial years since our taking the business back under private ownership after our time with TUI. That's given us a pretty healthy balance sheet and a decent free cash position. But like every travel company, the more credit vouchers we can issue, the more we'll be able to keep our teams together, the more we'll be able to bounce back as quickly as possible, as you've suggested through that DMC network. So we've now got to assess what we do with June and September. There were less bookings to depart, around about 25,000 bookings to depart over that period, because clearly we were still in that bookings window during this time to fill those trips. And look, we hope we'll have a similar outcome where we'll get 95% of our customers accepting those credit vouchers. And I've put up a pretty open letter to our customers overnight in the UK, just really explaining why it's so important to ourselves and to the travel industry that the customers do accept these credit vouchers. It's hugely important for us and indeed for the whole industry.
Certainly, and yeah, that open letter you referenced, actually, we have just put up on TTG this morning. So anyone who wishes to read that, James's thoughts on that, can do that there. And just picking up on refunds again, just quickly, is that I mean, presumably you can understand that there is some frustration out there among people, and that there has been difficulties from some getting what I suppose they are deserved, they require back. I know it's a difficult situation balancing the need to try and keep money within the business and also having these trips take place at a later date as well potentially. But I mean, how have you gone to manage expectations at the moment, really, in terms of clients?
Well, I mean, we have been very open to say that we are honouring our booking conditions. We're legally obliged to honour our booking conditions, and those booking conditions vary in every single market. And I think one of the things we probably didn't do very well at the start of the process was respond quickly enough to some of those customer inquiries for refunds. Our priority is very much the safety of our passengers, repatriating those 3,000 customers home. Our second priority was then, managing our cost base and reducing that cost base, understanding the revenue that we had coming in, then trying to take advantage of some of the government schemes. And we're a complex business, 30 offices around the world in very different countries. And we probably weren't quick enough to respond to those customers who just said, no, I want a refund. And thanks very much. I appreciate the credit voucher, but it doesn't suit me. Give me a refund. And we've just been a bit too slow in that. Part of it's we've been reducing that cost base with the customer relations team. So we've taken steps over the course of the last week to increase the number of customer relations people. And so getting through those refund requests now, the 1,400 that I mentioned, but like I say, it's less than 5% all up. And we're seeing the vast majority of our customers continuing to want to take those credit vouchers and move forward. We're quite a unique company in many respects because we're private. We don't necessarily have to publish our financial data, but we publish a very open annual integrated report which can be downloaded on the Intrepid Group website, and it has full coverage of our P&L and our balance sheet there from the 2019 calendar year. So customers can see and agents and partners can see that we have a really good, strong financial base, and that gives people the confidence to know that no matter how long this situation goes for, Intrepid will get through it.
Perfect. And James, looking ahead a little bit further now, actually, so we've you're looking at the end of September, and obviously we know that could be subject to change potentially at this stage. But when we do get to a point where we return to traveling, we're seeing these destinations around the world again. Is it going to change the style in which you travel, or is Intrepid going to focus much again on its core kind of objectives in terms of what it delivers by way of a travel proposition?
Yeah, I think Intrepid will always stick to its core proposition in local transport, local accommodation, interacting with the local people, trying the food, traveling in a very responsible way, taking on issues of advocacy around things like climate action and over tourism. So we'll want to continue to do that. I think one of the things you'll see Intrepid do over the course of the coming weeks and months is trying to reimagine ourselves a little bit more, try and accelerate some of the transformations we had in our 2025 strategy plan, try and generate new forms of revenue. I think you'll see pretty quickly new domestic travel ranges launched here in Australia and New Zealand, probably in the UK, in the US, in Canada, where most of our travellers come from, providing domestic travel options as well. And then continuing to stick to the kind of core of what we do, which is to provide these fantastic, unique experiences. And I think it's the type of travel that increasingly customers want to go on, and it's why we've doubled the size of the company over the last 4 years. And I'm sure once travel does bounce back and reopen, that we'll be able to take advantage of that.
Yeah, I'm very intrigued actually what you mentioned a moment ago in terms of the idea of that transition potentially towards more domestic travel options. And I mean, it sets your mind thinking as someone who lives in the UK or Australia, what the potential could be there. I mean, I'm sure we can all think of a few things in the UK that would make for interesting domestic trips, let's say.
Absolutely. I think, it's the notion, and I'm going to sound, as an English person living in Australia, I'm going to sound very Australian now, I'm afraid, but it's that notion of exploring your own backyard. And I don't know about you, but I certainly find that, my number one thing when it comes to travel is to jump on a plane and get out and see the world, isn't it? And, the brutal reality is that often we don't see some of the fantastic things that are close to our home. And, if there's one thing that I think COVID has taught us, it's also taught us the impacts that all of our activities in life have on the climate. And we've seen these incredible data pieces, haven't we, where suddenly pollution has freed up in cities around the world, and suddenly you're seeing wild fish return to canals in Venice and the like. And I just think we've got to be mindful that people want to have more localized domestic travel experiences. And so as a responsible travel business and a company that wants to have a lighter footprint, building up some of these opportunities is, I think, will not only play to customer demand, but it will potentially play to, as people get more confidence to get back traveling and doing that. So yeah, I think it sets up well.
Yeah, and I think what you mentioned in terms of the instincts, so often when you work in the travel sector, is to think I need to jump on an aircraft to go and actually have my holidays. You don't even consider that. I mean, what thought has Intrepid given so far to any potential changes in the way we actually have to travel? So there have been some suggestions around whether we might have to wear PPE for all travel at the moment and things like that, or whether immunity passports and all these things might be an issue. And given the nature of some of the very localized experiences you offer, I mean, there must be some thought you have to give to those kind of considerations.
Absolutely. I mean, you can imagine some of the, when you go to a home cooking school in Delhi and eating with your hands, you kind of walk down the street now and go to the supermarket, and you won't touch anything, will you? If you're crossing the road, you're using your elbow to touch the crossing device. So it's definitely going to change. I think it's going to change progressively, though. I think there'll be a lot of testing of ideas. Some of the ideas will be adopted very quickly. Some of the ideas will not work. And I keep kind of referring back to when has there been seismic changes with the travel industry, or when there been seismic changes in our life? And sadly, I reflect back on some of the awful terrorist disasters that have happened. If you think to 9/11, how did flying return? Many people would say they would never get in an airplane again, and yet flying did return over the course of time. But just the nature of how we do it, it took longer to progress through airports. And that becomes the new normal. It is the new normal if you travel, to put liquids in a bag and to take off get your devices out and you go through machines. So that human desire for connection continues. It's just that increasingly things start to become the new norm, don't they? And I think that's the way it will be. If it's, I don't know, an immunity passport, or is it that check-in takes 4 hours, or is it that middle seats don't exist on aeroplanes? I think individuals' desire to get out and see the world and connect with people will be there. I think just one of the risks at the moment in the early stages is just the cost. If you take middle seats out of airplanes, the cost of being able to get those airplanes is going to go up, and that's going to be we've been living in the golden age of travel, and it'd be a sad thing if travel only becomes the means of the wealthy, and I just that would be extremely disappointing. So we'll have to address that.
Yeah, but it's good to feel though that the desire to travel and everyone's want to get out into the world, like you said before, with the challenges we've recovered from in the past, we have still that desire to go and travel has come out on top. And we have adapted to, like you say, new normals. So do you feel that will be very much the same this time? There will be that period of uncertainty where things are kind of, new things happen, we perhaps don't necessarily like them, but in the end, I mean, I am now obviously perfectly willing to take my shoes off before a flight, and those sort of things. We will get to that point where it will restore some level of normality.
I think so. I just think, I live in Australia. I'm British. I have family in the US. I'm used to being in a very fortunate position. I know because we're in the travel industry, but get to travel to 20 or 25 countries a year, either for work or pleasure. And I'm going to want to get out and do those things when I have the opportunity to. So, but things will just change, and sometimes that changes for the better, and sometimes it isn't. But that human connection, and I've missed that human connection. If there's one thing I've missed during this period of the last 6 weeks, it's the connection of being able to, we were supposed to have a chat a month ago in person, weren't we? And we
Yeah.
were obviously not able to do that. And the connection of being able to bring my little boy to the UK to spend time with his family, to go and watch a football game or whatever it might be. So yeah, I think human connection is a pretty important thing, and the desire for that is going to be very true. And I think that's what the travel industry provides, doesn't it? It provides these wonderful experiences, whether that's an experience of seeing a city, or going and sitting on a beach, or trying some local food, or meeting some people. It's that connection element to realize that fundamentally people around the world, despite their religious or racial differences, are actually very similar, and that's what people, I think, will continue to crave, or I certainly hope they will. And that's why we've got to make sure that companies like Intrepid and all of the different travel companies out there try and hibernate as best we can over the course of the coming weeks and months ahead, and stick together as best we can. And that's super difficult, but if we can do that, then hopefully we can come outside and continue to provide the wonderful experiences that we've been providing.
Yeah. James, if we could we just move on just ever so quickly to the UK specifically, and
Sure.
Europe. You've got a new leader for the UK and European region, I believe, in Zina Benchek. Is that correctly how I pronounce her name?
Zina Benchik, yeah.
Yeah. Can you tell us a little bit about her appointment and the role she has in the UK?
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, I mean, I was delighted to be able to appoint Zina into the business. We had a change of leadership towards the end of last year. We went out and did an extensive search internally and externally. And actually, it's funny, at the time we started the search, I gave Zina a call. I was in New York, called Zina, who was in, I think, Latvia, doing one of our leader trainings. So Zina has grown up in the Intrepid business. She's an accountant by trade. She worked for PwC, and then joined us as our finance manager of Morocco business, and was the general manager of our Morocco DMC before becoming the regional general manager for Europe, the Middle East, and Africa. And I called her up and said, "Hey, Zina, I reckon it could be a great opportunity for you here to go and run our whole UK and European division." And she said, "Oh, not too sure about that, and it's a big jump to kind of move away from that kind of operational finance side." And I said, "But Zina, you've been a champion of diversity, and Zina is very well known on the speaking circuit. She's very passionate around issues of gender diversity. She's an incredibly motivated, powerful speaker. She's a mum of two beautiful young children, and she's a great leader. She gets the most impressive feedback internally from her people." And after kind of a couple of months of going out and doing a search, Zina called me up one day and said, "Hey, I know you're going to be in London, and I want to talk to you about something." And when Zina wants to talk to you about something, she's pretty persistent and persuasive, and she said, I want this job, and I think I'm right for it." And we were incredibly excited to be able to appoint her. So Zina will, she's French Moroccan. She will put a very different slant on the way in which we've run and operated. But for me, a senior female leader, someone from a different background that represents, we have 1,000 Intrepid staff around the world, and 90% of those 90% of our people don't often come from traditional Australian or UK or Canadian countries. So it's great to have someone of Zina's passion and skill come and lead our business. So, and I'm sure she'll be very present on the speaking circuit there.
Brilliant. And just partly, obviously, given our focus at TTG, I mean, we're here for the travel trade. What's the situation in terms of Intrepid's commitment to the trade as we go through this process, and then when we come out the other side? Is that going to ramp up again?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, the Intrepid started 31 years ago by its first part of its distribution was travel agent support. The 47 passengers that we booked in our first year in 1989 all came through Australian travel agents, and still today over 50% of our business comes from the UK, comes from the travel trade. It's no different in the UK, and yeah, we want to continue to support in any which way we can. And the increasingly travel trade's focus and travel agents' focus on sustainable experience-rich travel and getting out and seeing the world in a more adventurous way is having lots of benefit for us. So it'll be a key focus of Zina's when we're able to open up borders and get people traveling again.
Brilliant. And I know Intrepid put several years of effort, I mean, obviously far more with the background in it, into achieving B Corp status as well, which really does set out some fairly sort of rigorous kind of guidelines for how you operate. Can you just give us a little insight into what kind of benefits that's given you at this time as well, when you're dealing with these challenges?
Yeah, I think the B Corp status is all about the fundamental of benefiting all stakeholders. So it's very, very clear that you need to benefit your customers, benefit your people, benefit your business, benefit your shareholders, benefit your local communities, and have a positive benefit on the environment. And then talk and openly and transparently report on the activity that you do. And so anyone who's interested in the Intrepid business can go to the Intrepid Group website. There's a tab that says reports, and it has the 2019 annual report, and it tells you everything you would like to know about the Intrepid business. It tells you the good things that we do. It also tells you the things that we don't do well, and the things that we want to try and do better. And it gives you a full, open, transparent view of our financials. How has it helped guide us? I think it's just helped guide us that at all times in the decisions we've made, we've been trying to balance all of the different stakeholders. And sometimes those decisions we've had to make are often counter to some of the different stakeholders, and it's super challenging. It's been really, really challenging. But I think the thing that we ultimately try and do is we try and be open, try and be transparent. When we don't get things right, we admit to it, put our hands up. You'll see that open letter on the TTG website, where I think we've done some things incredibly well, and I think we've done some things we haven't done as well over the last couple of weeks, and we learn from those, and we try and get better. And for all of us, we're flying in the face of making some of the toughest decisions in the last 6 to 8 weeks that any of us have had to make in our personal, professional careers before. And very few of us will get them all right or get them perfect. And there's one thing I've always learned from my time at Intrepid: it's okay to say when you don't do things that well. And it just makes you, it's that human connection, isn't it? So that's what B Corp status teaches us, and to make sure that when we do recover and when we do reimagine the business, that we are putting all of those stakeholders at the forefront of the decisions that we make.
Yeah, and finally, James, look, I'm not going to ask you to make any outlandish predictions here or anything like that, but we're working to that 30th September timetable at the moment. That may be extended. We may go on further. There may be changes to how we have to operate, etc., and all these things. But just finally, really, I mean, how do you reflect on what this may well teach us in terms of how we have to operate as a travel business, and also then just how you feel we're going to look back at this and the sector maybe in a couple of years' time, and reflect on what we need to learn from what has happened certainly over the last 6 weeks, but even back a few months before that as well.
Yeah, look, it's going to make sure that we're resilient as businesses, isn't it? The fact that if businesses have been running off and living off client cash as their only way of existing, that's not a sustainable way of being able to run and operate travel companies. That a company like Intrepid, we've got no debt, we're 100% owned by our founders and our staff. That you do have to have a level of financial conservancy in terms of some of the decisions that you make. And I hope it will be a time that many good travel businesses are able to get through and reflect on some of the benefits that are happening. And there aren't a lot of benefits with this pandemic, are there? But the climate is in a better shape. If we're going to try and meet the Paris Accord, then we had to take serious action. COVID has given us that serious action. So the way in which we respond does need to be in the mindfulness of making sure that we respond in a responsible and sustainable way. It would be great that we don't have to talk about issues of climate, great that we don't have to talk about issues of over-tourism. We need to continue to travel in a sustainable way that benefits all stakeholders, and those stakeholders include the environment, and they include local communities and local people who provide these fantastic experiences for people on the ground. So if we can try and take some small wins from that, and ensure the products that we develop and sell going forward have all those elements in, and we can try and work towards benefiting all stakeholders.
Excellent. Well, look, thank you so much, James, for joining us this morning. And as I mentioned earlier, that open letter from James is available on the TTG website now as well, so you can read some more kind of condensed thoughts of what we've been through this morning. But James, thank you, and hoping that we can meet up in person in the not too distant future.
Yeah, I hope so, James. Thanks for the chat. Good evening, good day.
Thank you, James.
Nice to see you.